Welcome back to the Dethroning Your Inner Critic YouTube channel. I'm your host, Joanna Kleinman, psychotherapist, CEO of the Dethroning Your Inner Critic personal and professional growth and development company, dedicated to the internal transformational shift that creates the embodiment of your highest self. So today we're going to dive into talking about living in the gain versus living in the gap. Now, this is a concept that I hope will revolutionize the way that you think about your success and your happiness and your fulfillment. And of course, it's all tied up with the patterns of thoughts and beliefs of our ever-present inner critic that we are constantly bumping up against, especially when we're doing our most important work. So I'm reading this great book by Ben Hardy and Dan Sullivan called 10X is Easier Than 2X. And the subtitle is How World-Class Entrepreneurs Achieve More by Doing Less. So this concept of the difference between the gap and the gain is the brainchild of Dan Sullivan, and it's based on his work with successful entrepreneurs, and he is brilliant. So I'm really loving this book, and I'm really loving it mostly because it goes against so much of what we've been taught about what success looks like. So often we tie our happiness and fulfillment and satisfaction to something in the future. And you've heard me say this before. We tell ourselves, I will be happy or fulfilled or have more freedom when I achieve my goal, right? My financial success, or maybe you're writing a book or you're creating art to sell for a business. So you're waiting for that arrival point, that promotion, or maybe you're waiting for your dream house. Okay. So if you've been listening to me for a while, you've heard me say that many times, but here's the thing that's different about this. Okay. When you are chasing that external thing, no matter what it is, you're actually disconnecting internally. And when you're disconnected internally, that's where you are living in what Dan Sullivan calls the gap. Okay. So my work is all about designing your dream life by becoming an energetic match from the inside. Okay. And that's how we are living in a life in which we're connected to our body and our mind in a fundamentally new way that keeps us plugged into our higher self now, not in this illusion of believing that our higher self will emerge when we get there. Okay. And when we are able to be plugged into our highest self now, that's where all these synchronistic opportunities naturally show up, because we're rewiring the energy that we're putting out into the world. We're rewiring new neural pathways in our brain. We're rewriting the stories that we've been dragging around with us from our past. And we step into this new sense of worthiness that's very different than the level of worthiness that our old self would ever allow us to have, right? Because that old self is really the identity that's been formed by our inner critic self. So when we're in the gap, we measure our lives based on these ideal standards that have been handed down to us. And when we're in the gap, we are susceptible to being constantly triggered by whether we feel like we're meeting our goals, or we're triggered by other people's actions or their expectations or what we think they think of us. Okay. And that's impossible to be clear in your vision when you are living your life in the gap. Okay. And we are just kind of stuck in our survival mechanism, right? We're constantly in this state of fight, flight, freeze, waiting for that shoe to drop, being anxious, and needing our external circumstances to look a particular way so that we can feel at peace. And we never get to that sense of peace. We never get to that sense of fulfillment. If we're there, it's very short-lived. So the gap is really this tricky place, okay, where you're following these ever elusive ideals. So my friend and fellow coach Jamie Myers says it's like trying to swim to get to the horizon, right? No matter how fast you swim or how far or how long you're swimming, you're never getting there. Okay. And so what the problem with that is that any progress you make feels like a letdown because it's just never enough. So it's a recipe for chronic discontentment, and it just fuels our inner critic. So when I'm caught in that trap, my restless and perfectionistic and inadequate inner critics are governing every facet of my life, right? They're governing my mood. They're governing my energy. They're governing my experience of myself. They're governing how I wake up in the morning. They're governing my interactions with the people around me. I'm basically showing up day in and day out as my worst self. Now, the gain, on the other hand, is when you look back and you measure your progress based on how far you've come and what you've already achieved. So you're comparing yourself to your past self, the person who you were when you first set out to meet these goals. So gain thinking is all about celebrating your progress and what you've already achieved. And that celebration, that experience of who you've become already is what gets you in touch with a new self. That's living your life in your authentic self instead of living your life being governed by your inner critic. So if you find yourself constantly worrying about what you haven't yet achieved, you're in the gap. You are letting your inner critic run your life. If you're focused on what you've already accomplished, you're in the gain. You're living your life from your authentic self. And that is a constant shift because we're naturally hardwired to stay stuck in the gap. That's our primitive survival mechanism that causes our inner critic to only pay attention to what isn't yet good enough about ourselves and about our lives. And so if you think about it this way, living in the gap is like living in a constant state of anxiety because you're thinking about the things that haven't happened yet. And you're constantly looking at those worst case scenarios and drumming those things up in your mind. Now, your brain can't tell the difference between an imagination and what's happening in concrete reality. So your nervous system is literally behaving as though the things that might not ever happen are actually happening right now. So it's the perfect breeding ground for stress and self-doubt, and it feeds our inner critic. Okay. Now, so many clients that I work with come into the Mastering Your Mind program because they're so sick and tired of living in a constant state of waiting for that shoe to drop and feeling overwhelmed and unfulfilled. And many of them have reached a level of success. And they're more miserable than ever before because they've actually checked off the boxes that their inner critic kept convincing them, once you get there, that will be the answer. And now that's not the answer. Okay. So for those of you who, you're still sort of stuck in that illusion, right? And you keep thinking, oh, once I get there, that'll be the answer. I really want you to understand it is not going to be the answer. Okay. When we're stuck in the illusion of the arrival point, it's a false sense of happiness and excitement because we truly believe that we're on the right track. Okay. So many people spend all these years being in what they think is happiness and what they think is excitement because they've got this big vision, but they're really waiting until the vision gets fulfilled before they'll actually experience the joy of the life that they've already created. So if we're talking about the gap, it's about chasing something in the future. Okay. And when you're chasing something in the future, you're not in your life because your life is only taking place in this very moment. It's the only place that our life actually takes place, right? Even if we're thinking about a future that we're getting excited about, that's our imagination. Okay. If we're thinking about our past, that's our imagination. The past is dead and gone. The future is that ever dangling carrot in front of us, right? We're never getting to a future. There's only right now. Okay. So whether you're dreading your future or you're excited about your future, when you think about your future, it's still an illusion. Okay. So that false sense of excitement will turn into some serious emotional and maybe even physical pain, okay, when you reach the arrival point and recognize, oh my goodness, that didn't do it for me, okay? It is not a fun place to be, let me tell you, okay? When you are stuck there, it can be a pretty dark place, okay? And so just think about all of the millionaires, billionaires, celebrities dealing with depression and substance abuse, okay? They're the ones that have reached all of these external goals, but internally, they're still in the gap, okay? So getting out of the gap and into the gain is not only possible, but it's actually essential for your happiness, for your well-being, and for the quality of your life, not just now, but as you move into your future, okay? So to be able to move into the gain, to do this, you need to embrace a freedom of the things that your inner critic says it needs, okay? You've got to be able to unhook yourself from your inner critic's attachment to needs. You have to shift your perspective and understand that your freedom, your joy, your fulfillment, your happiness is not tied to anything in the future. You've got to do the conscious and deliberate practice to appreciate who you already are and all that you've already accomplished. Okay. Now let's talk about successful entrepreneurs for a moment. Okay. So they reach a point of no return where their identity and energy shift from what they fear might happen in the future to fully committing to designing that future. Okay. And the most successful entrepreneurs are the ones that elevate their identity and their behaviors to be the person now who already has all that they want. Okay? That's the one thing that has changed every single facet of my life. the practice of being that person now and having the experience that in my experience of my life now, I feel like I've already won the multi-million-dollar lottery. Why? Because I have done the hard work of shifting my experience of myself, transforming my relationship with myself, transforming my relationship with my husband of 26 years, transforming my relationship with my 3 children, transforming the way that I see the business that I'm building, transforming the way that I view the impact that I'm making in the world. Okay. I've literally unhooked myself from my inner critic's need to have it look and go a particular way. Now, here's where the self-determination theory comes into play. So self-determination means that we all have the right to direct our futures, to have control over how we live our lives, right? And to who we hang out with, the things that we do with our free time, and to have authority over the resources that we need to support this life. Okay. Now, your future is going to be one of 2 things. Either you're doing more of what you're already doing. Okay. So you're thinking and believing in the same way, that's creating those same emotional patterns, and those same emotional patterns are creating the same patterns of behavior that are continuing to produce basically the same results in your life over and over and over again. Okay. And that is going to, as you can imagine, have a very negative impact on your mental and emotional health, which eventually is going to lead to having issues in your physical health. Okay. Your psychological health. So you can keep doing that, or you can choose to be on a transformational path. Okay. And a transformational path means you have a big vision that compels you to shift how you're viewing yourself and your life right now. And it is that shift in your identity that will compel you to play a much bigger game. In other words, to massively step outside of the comfort zone that your inner critic has created. Because let's be clear, building our dream vision is hard. Okay. It is not for everyone. In fact, most people don't go this route. Okay. Why is it hard? Because we are constantly living outside of our comfort zone. We are constantly being bumped up against our deepest, darkest fears. And if we are not learning how to transform ourselves from the inside, okay, we're creating a lot of fear-based living, a lot of the experience of scarcity. You know, we're fueling this idea that we're not enough, our lives are not enough. And, you know, that's been perpetuated in our culture for forever. In my opinion, that's where we've gone wrong. Okay. And that's fueled a lot of mental health issues. It's fueled a lot of people continuing to stay in these generational forms of trauma from one generation to the next. Okay. But here's the thing. It's not about working harder, working more. Okay. It is about learning a totally different approach to everything. Because nothing that you're doing right now is going to get you to where you want to be. You have to first create a future that's so big, it seems impossible. Okay. But you have to believe that it's actually possible. And you don't know how you're going to create it, what puzzle pieces are going to come together, what miracles are going to unfold in your life, what conditions are going to come into your life. You don't know those things. but you can still believe that that future is possible. Okay. So you can think about, what do I really need to have in my life right now that's going to make that impossible goal actually possible? That's the question that you need to ask yourself. What do I need for myself? What boundaries am I not setting? Where am I saying yes when I really need to be saying no? Where do I need to be really harnessing my energy? Where do I need to be taking care of my physical and emotional well-being in ways that I'm currently not? So when you start believing in that big, exciting future, that's when the magic happens. Okay? Because you're transforming yourself and your life through this future that you're creating. And nothing's going to happen until you fully commit to it. Okay? And many people think that they're fully committed. They say, yeah, I'm fully committed. But they keep doing the same thing over and over again in their actual life, and then they're expecting different results, right? That sounds familiar. That's the definition of insanity. So one practical tip that you can apply right now is measuring 3 wins every day. So you can use the last hour of your day to write down your 3 wins for today. And that's a really concrete way to track your progress and to be proud of your transformation. And it helps you really see that new identity that you're becoming. Okay. Now, momentum only happens after you commit. And trust me, momentum does not happen right away. Right? You have to commit, and you have to stay committed no matter what. Even when you don't see the results, even when you don't see the momentum, even when your inner critic whips up all your frustration and fear and doubt, you have to stay committed. And that's when, after a while, right, could be years, you start to look back at your life. You stop looking towards your future with dread and worry, and you start looking back, and you are left being in awe. Because every fiber of your being is different. You start looking at the miracles that you've literally attracted into your life because you've done the work to shift yourself from the inside. So the crucial question for you to ask yourself is, are you now measuring yourself by the gap or the gain? Okay. So you might kind of flip back and forth between the two, because remember, we are hardwired to keep looking for where we're not enough, where it's not enough, what's not working. And if we stay there, it can be soul crushing. Okay. This is when so many people get to the end of their life and look back and they wish that they had thought about things differently. Even if they've, fulfilled on their dreams, they look back and they have deep regret for how they lived their life and what they focused on, and how they always felt like no matter where they were, it was never enough. And that is letting your inner critic run your life. Okay. Now, living in the gain is a totally different way of living. Okay. It is the only way to create that deep, fulfilling sense of satisfaction and peace and freedom and joy. Okay. It's the only way. So the next time you measure your achievement, I want you to stop and focus on where you are now compared to where you were before. I want you to really focus on celebrating your gains, even if they're small right now. Okay. I want you to let your growth be that momentum that keeps propelling you forward towards that life that we're building. Okay. So take a moment right now. Think of an example in your own life where a shift in perspective, literally a paradigm shift, turned a particular experience that you've had from a gap into a gain. Can you see a situation in which acknowledging the gain might motivate you to continue to make even more progress in this area? So if that resonates with you, I'd love to hear from you. You can send me an email or share your comments on social media. I'd love to hear from you. So before we wrap up, I just want to share my own personal story about going from living in the gap to living in the game. So the gain. So for, I would say, most of my earlier life in my career, I held myself to a really rigid set of goals. And if I didn't meet them, I would beat myself up over it. And I was living in the gap for many, many years. Looking back, I was living in a perpetual state of anxiety, and it took a toll. It took a toll on me emotionally. It took a toll on me physically. It took a toll on my marriage. It took a toll on my relationship with my 3 children. And it took a toll on the results that I was producing. So now that I'm living in the gain, there are certainly goals that I don't meet, but it doesn't impact me the way that it used to. There are things that don't work out the way I want it to, and I can stay in a place of freedom and peace while I'm brainstorming what's the next action for me to take. Okay. So I'm celebrating how far I've come, and sure, I'm still building my life, but the grip of the attachment that my inner critic used to have. Well, my inner critic still does have that grip of attachment. I just don't live my life from my inner critic. So I don't have this intense grip on the things that I used to think I needed before I could truly feel fulfilled. Okay. So it's made a huge difference in my relationship with myself. It's made a huge difference in my relationship with the people that matter the most to me. And it's made a huge difference in how I wake up every morning, right? I wake up with excitement for the day instead of dread. And my life has taken on really a magical quality, okay? Because what I know is that there are miracles that are waiting for me. Okay. So I don't get entangled in the anxiety and fear about how the future is going to go, because I know I can handle whatever comes. And guess what? There's always going to be things that don't go the way we want them to go, because that's how life goes. Okay. So the freedom to know I don't need to anticipate the shoe dropping because I can handle whatever comes my way. That has changed every facet of my life. I'm not waiting for the shoe to drop. Okay. I know how to return myself to the present moment and to live in gratitude and to experience the abundance of the life that I've already created and just how far I've come. Okay. So here's to measuring how far you've come instead of what your inner critic thinks you've missed. I implore you to embrace the gain, to celebrate your wins, and to keep unhooking from your inner critic and dethrone her from being the ruler of your mind. So thanks for tuning in today, and I'll see you on the next episode.